Before we start this episode, I wanted to announce that I will be moving the show from a weekly format to a bi-weekly format. I would love to have the resources to produce a show every week, but what's more important to me is that each story is represented here with respect, compassion, and dignity. So beginning today, episodes will drop every other Tuesday. If you don't already, please be sure to follow along on Instagram at the HXPod for announcements and other content.
In most cultures, the women are only supposed to give birth and nurture the babies.
Yeah.
Nothing else. And then at the camp, they begin to question the status quo. Humanity keeps shocking me that we still have the capacity, even after witnessing such suffering, that we have the capacity to hurt each other. You cannot solve everybody's problem. You pick one thing and you be excellent in it and meet that need. And hopefully someone else is meeting the other needs.
Welcome to The Human Experience. I'm Jennifer Peterkin, and this is episode 18, Winnie's Story. When I interviewed Winnie, she was the program director of NEMA, a nonprofit that runs a skills trade facility for vulnerable young women in rural Western Kenya. If you've been here a while, NEMA should sound pretty familiar to you at this point, as I've interviewed several of their staff members. As always, if you're interested, you can check out the show notes to learn more about NEMA and how you can get involved. Winnie, though, has since moved into a different role outside of NEMA, and while she would have continued to thrive in that space, it honestly doesn't surprise me. And after hearing her story, I doubt you'll be surprised either. Winnie has a zest for the difficult, for the things that most of us shy away from. Conflict and tension are concepts that she is able to hold well, a feat that many of us are unable to accomplish, squirming at the first sign of discomfort. Having worked all over the world, Winnie brings an enormous amount of both work and life experience to everything that she does. She's passionate about people. She has witnessed great joy and great suffering, and she sits in that tension with beauty and lament. In the interview, Winnie talks about a short story she wrote that was published in a book called Nairobi Noir. You can find a link to purchase her book in the show notes, something I highly recommend as Winnie shares her fictional story from a place of very real pain and injustice. Let's get right into it. I want to know your story. I've heard bits and pieces as we've spent this last week together, but I know you grew up not in Kitale, and your mom had a farm.
Yeah.
Tell me about growing up.
I was born in Nairobi, in the city, and from a young age, I didn't like the city. So luckily, my mom had a farm in Nyeri, my mom and dad. So we moved to Nyeri. The reason that the whole family actually moved, because we went one December for the holidays, and I refused to go back to the city, and I was 5. And so my mom had to figure out, does she leave me with my grandmother alone or what would happen? So I stayed with my grandmother, just the two of us. And my mom was really worried and anxious. She would come on weekends to check on me, but I was separated from the other kids. So my mom figured out that all of us should move to Nyeri, which is in central Kenya and more rural. So that's how I made the whole family move, and some of them don't like me for it.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah. Life in Nairobi would probably have been better for some of my siblings. So better schools. So, for example, some of us had to go to the village school, which wasn't a really wise choice. Now that I think of it, yeah.
So it was your grandmother's farm. Did your mom grow up there?
My mom, funny enough, grew up like 15, 20 minutes from where my dad grew up.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah. So there was more community because now I could see my grandparents, I could see my cousins, whereas in Nairobi, it was just us.
Yeah.
The challenge was that my dad was a train engineer with Kenya Railways. So we saw him probably once a month, which was terrible.
Oh, okay. So he stayed in Nairobi to work.
He had to, because in Nyeri, there is no railway. So he couldn't even look for a transfer. So that was the sad bit about moving.
Yeah. How many siblings do you have?
I have 4. Sadly, one passed on last year.
Yeah.
So now I have 1 brother and 2 sisters.
Yeah.
But we're all very, very close. And my mom. My dad died in 1997.
Oh, okay.
So that's over 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's just been us and mom. So
yeah, for a long
we are
time.
really pretty close family.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you get to see your mom and your siblings a lot?
One of my sisters is abroad, so I get to see her during summer. But I get to see my mom at least every other month. And every time I'm on leave, I must see my mom.
Yeah.
And to see my mom, I pass through my sister's town. She lives in Nakuru, so I always see my sister, my elder sister. So, and when I go home, I have to see my brother because he lives in the same compound. He has his own place, but he lives in the same compound as my mom.
Yeah. So it's all together. That's good. So what was it like growing up on a farm? You're clearly not a city.
No.
Not a city girl.
It was fun. There was lots of creativity in creating your own fun, like making your own toys. Most of my cousins didn't have toys. So when we got toys, they got destroyed in a day. So my mom and dad got tired of buying us stuff. So we started making our own, like my cousins. I remember we could make our own soccer balls. Yeah. We would make our own cars using scrap metals, and for wheels we would do rubber. We would cut like old flip-flops.
Oh yeah.
And make tires out of that. We made our own dolls. It was fun.
Yeah.
I think the best part of it was growing up with cows and sheep. So we didn't have enough water to feed the cows, so we would actually drive the cows to the river.
Oh. That's interesting.
To the stream, yeah. And on the way, we were so close to the cows, we would actually climb on top of the cows as if they were horses. I know. That was so much fun. And the cows would be, cows are usually gentle creatures. Yeah, my cousins and I, we had so much fun growing up. And we had no swimming pool, but we would go to the stream and we would trap the water using stones.
Yeah.
And make like a temporary dam. And there was a part for girls upstream and then the boys were downstream. That was so much fun. Sometimes monkeys, because we live close to I hope I pronounced this right, the Abadeas National Park. Monkeys, regulars in our neighborhood, they would steal our clothes. So we had to figure out, how do we swim? We would be swimming butt naked, all of us. And one day some monkeys stole our clothes and we walked across the village, all of us naked.
My goodness. That is hilarious.
And all our parents were so mad at us.
Well, what could you do?
I know.
The monkeys stole the clothes.
And we could see the monkeys laughing at us and showing us the clothes like, here. But you can't get to us.
No.
Yeah,
I don't think so.
So basically, I really had a fun childhood.
That sounds so fun and free and creative. I love that. Yeah. What did you grow on the farm?
Coffee. Coffee is the main cash crop in the area, but also some of my neighbors had tea. But in our home, we still have coffee. We grow corn, and we also grew lots of vegetables, tomatoes, cabbage, spinach, kale, like lots of stuff, and fruit also.
And do you sell everything or just the coffee?
Just the coffee.
Just the coffee.
The rest is like for home
family,
use, neighbors.
Yeah. Sure. But that's great. You're self-sustaining then, growing your own produce and stuff like that. Yeah. Now, I know who you sold your coffee to.
Yeah.
Can you tell me who you sold your coffee to?
So that is in 2009, 2010, my mom's coffee was sold to Starbucks. Yes.
It's just so crazy that I pass 4 or 5 of them every day, and here I am in Kenya talking about someone's coffee being used for their stores. Yeah. So that was the Kenyan blend, because I know sometimes they just name it after locations. So was it called the Kenyan roast or
I think so. I think it was the Kenyan roast.
Yeah.
And that year, Starbucks had an agreement with various coffee cooperatives, and my mom's was one of them. And so in 2010, if it was Kenyan roast, there was probably like a 30% chance it's my mom's cooperative.
Okay.
But my mom, what I'm proud of is that my mom was like the star.
Yeah. You should be proud.
And her farm was used to train the rest of the farmers on how to keep your coffee to be organic, how to make it smell nice. Like, did you know that you could influence the aroma of the coffee by the trees you plant alongside?
No. Wow.
Yes. So, for example, lemon trees, they have the same pests. So if you want to keep the pests off the coffee, you plant lemon trees. So the pests go to the lemon trees.
Interesting.
And in return, the lemon tree gives it a citric-ish aroma. Very nice. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So my mom can teach you all this.
Yeah. I know. I want to go take coffee classes from your mom. That's incredible. How does an opportunity like that come along? Because it just seems like there's so many farms out there. How did they narrow that down and find your mom?
I think they sampled various cooperatives. So they chose, I'm not sure how many in Kenya that they chose. And in our area, they went to various farms looking at the best grown coffee, and they decided it was my mom's. Yeah,
that's incredible.
The beans are healthier. They are all bright and red. The trees are well pruned. She's planted the right windbreakers, the trees that protect the coffee, etc. And she was 100% organic.
Yeah.
So no shortcuts with my mom. And it was evident. And I think the rest of the farmers also voted her as the most diligent when it came to coffee. Yeah.
Yeah. To have your peers back that up and say, actually, yes, that's correct. She's the best at this. That's fantastic. I mean, that must have just been so exciting for her to be recognized on that scale.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. You already said you're very proud, and I'm sure you continue to be.
Yes, I am.
So you grew up mostly on a farm, but I know you've traveled, you spent time in the States, you're working at a nonprofit, you've worked with refugees. So what was the transition from farm life to everything else?
Yeah, so I've always been good in the classroom. So I was a top student. So in Kenya, high schools are national schools. That's for top students. So they select countrywide. So you could be from anywhere and attend a Nairobi school. So I went to a national school because I was a top student. And so after that, I went to the university, but it was to study English and literature.
Okay.
I have always loved literature. So after college, I was approached by an organization that works in the refugee camps to go teach English to refugees and to train English teaching teachers in a UN-funded facility at Kakuma refugee camp. But even being at the university, I knew I don't want to teach in a regular school. I've never wanted the regular. I've always wanted to go the opposite of what people would call easy. So when they were looking for people to go to the refugee camp, I was the first. So I taught in Kakuma, and then I was later transferred to Dadaab refugee camp. At that time, it was the biggest refugee camp in the world. It has been for a long time. I don't know about now. But yeah, so while there, I got to venture into more than teaching. I got to meet people that had trauma, post-war trauma. I got to do more than teaching, like writing, funding proposals, just basic international development and relief and humanitarian work. So that was how I was
She's saying basic. It is basic in that every NGO has to do it, but it's not basic to do. It's complicated, and intense. Funding is hard, especially, filling out grant applications or trying to get government funding. That's a big deal.
Yeah. So I actually was asked to write a proposal my first week.
Wow.
At the camp. And I'm wondering, what is a funding proposal again? I had not even been trained on it. It was like being thrown into the deep end of a swimming pool, and you had to learn. So, and I realized I loved all of that. I loved humanitarian work. I loved development work, just basic. Sorry, I'm using that word, like NGO.
Oh, it's okay. I just wanted everybody to understand that you said basic, and that's fine. You're free to use whatever word, but it's intense. It's a lot of work.
It is. And I grew a lot. I was there at the refugee camps for 1.5 years. And then I got an opportunity to go teach at Bates College in Maine. So teaching anthropology and education departments, because they were already working with refugees, resettled refugees in the community. So I went there as sort of liaison. So that's how I was able to transition from Kenya to the US. So I taught at Bates for a year, an academic year, and I also stayed a bit for the summer. So while there, I got to know about Urban Promise. It's a nonprofit working in the inner city of Camden, New Jersey. They have other programs in Canada, Delaware, and I think Florida and other cities as well. But they started off in Camden. So I thought before coming to Kenya, I wanted to experience working in an inner city. So I went there as a volunteer.
Wow.
And ended up actually staying for more than a year. Working with inner city children and youth during the summer and also in their after school program. But what I was majorly doing is that I was working with the international arm. So they have Urban Promise International, which funds children and youth programs in Honduras and quite a number of countries in Africa. So I was fundraising for African programs. Yeah. And while there, I decided, let me upgrade my training, and I applied to Eastern University, where I did my master's in international development.
Wow. Okay, so I'm going to go back because there's so much there. It's fantastic. Did you do your undergrad in Nairobi?
Yes.
Okay.
No, not in Nairobi, in Eldoret.
Oh, in Eldoret. Okay.
Yeah.
But your high school was in Nairobi. Okay. So you stayed in Kenya for your undergrad and did the English program. Did you go for English because you wanted to teach somewhere? Like, is that why you went for that undergrad?
In Kenya, you can do BA English. So that means you could be a reporter or a journalist. But when you do BEd, Bachelor of Education, you're automatically being trained to be a teacher of that subject. So my undergraduate degree was in English and BEd, English and Literature, which means I could teach English and literature. But I don't think I went to do that course because I liked teaching, but because I love literature.
Right.
Yes.
No, I totally understand that. I totally understand that. Yeah. I was enrolled in an undergrad program with an English major for the same reason.
Yeah.
I didn't have any desire to teach. I just was like, this is something I love. So I guess we'll do this.
Yeah.
I didn't end up doing that, but so the refugee camps, the UN, you said, put it out there. So it was just kind of like anybody can take this, or were you approached specifically? I
was approached specifically by someone who used to be a liaison between the organization I worked for. It's Window Trust International.
Okay.
So they were looking for university people who were graduating from the university, and that guy picked me. And that's how I ended up at the refugee camp. But they usually advertise it's sort of a prestigious internship. So I was really privileged to have gotten it. Yeah, not everyone gets it just because they want it.
Yeah.
So it was really special and a privilege, and really grateful for that opportunity. Yeah.
That sounds like such an incredible opportunity for a lot of different reasons. You're not working with refugees currently, but what would you say were your learned lessons from, I mean, I know that's a very vague question. You can take that any way you want to, but working in refugee camps, I mean, it's something that not everybody will experience.
Actually, I can say it's made me to be who I am. I think it started from there. But from an awesome childhood, working at the refugee camps has been top of the experiences that have molded me to be who I am.
Yeah.
One of them I can say is Yes. And I know it's hard for you to say, I am humble, but that is where I learned humility.
Sure.
I learned so much, as a Kenyan, as an African, you think the West people, white people have the wealth, everything they need.
Mm-hmm. But
then when you go to the refugee camp and you've been feeling like you don't have much, and then you realize, in fact, you have more than what they do. It was the first time that I was exposed to statelessness. Because refugees, they don't have a country.
Right.
Not all of them can go back to their mother countries. And the host country, which is Kenya, doesn't want them as citizens. So they're not citizens. So it was the first time I heard of stateless persons. And the reality of what that means really shocked me.
Yeah.
Because I've always had an identity. I am a Kenyan, and I cannot begin to imagine what it would mean not able to say that I am Kenyan.
Yeah.
Or not have a place to call home. So that was really shocking. It changed my whole mentality about how identities are formed. It changed my whole perspective, really. Yeah. And then just gratefulness, really. Having my family, some of the people I worked with, they didn't even know. Imagine meeting a woman who doesn't know where their sons are.
Yeah.
Or one of their kids. Is he dead? Is he alive? Because probably they were forced to run in the middle of the night. And in the chaos, you lose your kids.
Sure.
And then you get to the border and realize I don't have all my kids. And I can't go back because chances of dying are really, really high. So we had families that had adopted kids they didn't know, but also don't know where their own kids are. So
wow,
that was really tough. And then finally, still on gratefulness, refugees are given identity cards called, well, I can't even call them identity cards. They're called ration cards. It just shows this is a card. This family has 6 people. So they just write family size 6. So it shows when you go to the World Food Program to queue for food, it shows that whoever is holding that card will get food for 6 people. The UN does have their names and their details, but it's not like your driver's license, which shows who you are. It's just a card that you use to, let me use this word, beg.
Yeah.
Queue for food. And I may not come from a rich family, but I've never had to queue for food.
Yeah.
My mom, my dad always provided more than enough. And sometimes we even had extra to give to my cousins or my neighbors. I've never lacked anything. I've never not slept in a bed. Refugees do not have beds. They sleep on the floor, And just that reality was so life-turning for me, like a whole shift, a whole paradigm shift in terms of perspective.
Yeah.
And I was able to see life in a different way that I had never been exposed to before. So that is why I'm super, super grateful that I went there, I worked there, because now I view myself as a refugee rights activist. I know I'm not actively working with refugees, but I see people talking ill of refugees, Kenyan police harassing refugees, and it just really, really infuriates me.
I don't think that leaves you after an experience like that, after those bonds are formed. I don't think that leaves you, even if you're not in the trenches at the moment.
Exactly. And I wasn't even doing much, I may say, because, I'm just teaching English and doing counseling, collecting refugee stories, etc. But
yeah, but that is much. That's more when your physical needs aren't being met. It's really difficult to get into the emotional and spiritual aspect of it because it doesn't matter as much. It just doesn't.
Yeah.
But when people consistently show up, that matters.
Yeah.
And proximity matters.
If I may add something, I really grew and matured at that time, including also my tolerance, because before I had never worked with people of a different religion. I was only exposed on my growing up in high school. We had a few Muslims, but I never interacted with them as much. But here was, especially in Dadaab, with 99% of the refugees coming from Somalia and embracing their culture, which is very closely entwined in with their religion. So being able to make friends, like friends that are really close to me right now. This young woman, she was my student, and brilliant, high sense of humor. She was really sharp. And she got a scholarship to Canada. When she comes to Kenya, she must see me. I must see her. We're that close. And some of them still in close contact, always talking, chatting, even though I'm not at the refugee camp. So great friendships that I made with Somali women, and it really grew into understanding and not just tolerating, but understanding another culture and religion and loving them and them loving me. Because it's not just the other side of the spectrum, it's them accepting and loving me as well. Yeah. And despite our differences, being able to live and interact and enjoy each other's company. So that was wonderful. Yeah. Yeah, that's why I say it was my favorite experience, really.
Sure. I don't know. I mean, that's such a benchmark in your life, right? It's something that you will always measure things by. You worked in 2 refugee camps. Both were in Kenya? Okay. Yeah. And the one you said is the largest in the world?
Yeah, Dadaab. Yeah, that's where the 90%, over 90% are Muslim.
From Somalia?
For Somalia.
Yeah. And the refugees that were in both camps, were all of them from African countries?
In Kakuma, it was more diverse. So we had from Somalia as well, from Sudan. Then it had not divided into Sudan and South Sudan. So it was just Sudan. There were refugees from northern Uganda, from Rwanda and Burundi, Ethiopia. Very few from Central African Republic. So about 9 countries in the same refugee camp.
Yeah. How is that when you have so many different cultures coming together? Does it matter at that point in terms of like how they feel about being so surrounded by other cultures and other community?
That's complex.
Yeah.
Because it's easy and not easy at the same time. Because first, they're all refugees.
Right.
So that's the tag
right.
For all of them. It's the label. But at the same time, where they have come from is also different. Their cultures are different. Yeah. And the UN had put them in various zones. So there were zones that were specifically for the Sudanese people. And there were zones that were specifically for the Somali people. There was the Ethiopian zone. There was probably the Francophones, Burundians, and maybe the Central African Republic were put together because there were fewer. But yeah, it was complicated.
Sure.
But they had learned with time to live peaceably with one another and appreciate one another.
Yeah.
And their differences. Yeah.
I'm sad to say I'm not that educated on the situation with refugees, specifically in Africa. How long would most people stay in these camps? Is it a long-term solution for a lot of people because they have nowhere else?
Yeah, sadly, I am sure. And I know that there are people I left at the refugee camps and are still there. And some of them have been at the refugee camp for longer than 20 years.
Wow.
And not able to move from the camps to the rest of Kenya. They are confined to that space.
Because they can't get citizenship.
And so long as you do not have a Kenyan ID to show you're Kenyan, there are some services you cannot get. If you're in Nairobi, you register with the UNHCR as an urban refugee, and usually they will still send you to the camps because they don't want refugees living in the cities. We still do have a huge population in the city, but most of them live in the camps and they can't leave unless they are resettled to the US, to Canada, or to Australia. Mm-hmm. And the numbers have kept dwindling. So you find less and less people being resettled.
Yeah.
And especially in the past decade, the number of resettled refugees really went down because of changing the immigration policy in the US. Yeah, because majority are resettled in the US. So once the numbers go down, then people who've been waiting to be resettled, they have to wait some more.
Yeah. And what's the process for being resettled? I know you said the numbers are dwindling because of restrictions and more immigration law. Mm-hmm. But how does one even attempt to be resettled?
Preference is given to maybe people with disabilities, people who've gone through sexual or gender-based violence, the minorities. So if you do not fall under those categories, or if your life is unsafe in a way, so if your life is normal, in quotes, at the refugee camp, then your chances of being resettled are very low. But Canada has a program through the World University Services of Canada. So they resettle high school students, those who just graduated high school, and they go to the universities in Canada. But they have to be top students and they have to pass their TOEFLs and IELTS, all those language proficiency tests. So, and it's not a huge number because World University Services of Canada, they give scholarships to refugees all over the world. So they also have a quota of refugees coming from Africa. And usually when, as a high school graduate, if you miss that, then
you're kind of stuck.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which is sad. Imagine at that age, you were born at the refugee camp, or you came when you were just a child, and then they thought that you were stuck there.
Yeah.
It's devastating.
It is devastating.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that a lot of us don't realize, the length of time that you're actually in a camp like this. Yeah. We like to, kind of romanticize it like they're safe and
having fun.
Or even just like, well, they're safe, and then we don't like to think about it anymore. Like what are the next steps? What happens next? And not realizing that they could spend decades living here.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's even more dangerous with the younger population because protracted refugee situations can also be very dangerous on the host country's national security. That's how the Al-Shabaab gets to recruit some of those youths that are frustrated to join their course.
Yeah.
You lose them because they don't have much to do and they're stuck. And here is someone offering them a way out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And
you have no rights. Yeah.
Looks more attractive than being stuck.
Sure. Mm-hmm. And, you can understand that.
Sadly.
And we were talking a little bit a few days ago about gender-based violence because that's something that I am involved in my community. But you had mentioned that you worked directly with those affected by gender-based violence in the camps. What was that process?
Well, I think that was the toughest part of my work. So many women. So most of the African cultures are really highly patriarchal. And the Somali culture is even more, if we would grade it, it's worse. And women have absolutely no say in anything, really. The number of children they want, like the basics you would think that a woman, the rights of a woman,
autonomy.
Exactly. They
doesn't exist.
They don't get to decide what the children do in terms of educational choices. They do not make decisions regarding money and how to use it.
Yeah.
So in most cultures, the women are only supposed to give birth and nurture the babies.
Yeah.
Nothing else. And then at the camp, they're exposed to all these kinds of teachings on women's rights, the girls' right to education. And all of a sudden they are enlightened and they begin to question the status quo, they begin to challenge the status quo.
Yeah.
And the men don't like that. So it's the number one cause of sexual and gender-based violence in the camp. Yeah. So if a woman says that they want their daughter to finish high school and probably get a scholarship to Canada, and the men do not believe that a girl should be educated, she should be married off at 13. After going through female genital mutilation, and then now she's ready for marriage. If now that woman or that girl questions the belief that she shouldn't be who she wants to be, then the men use their physical power over the women. And sometimes the humanitarian agencies are not able to do much and intervene in such situations. So you hope that you will talk to the community about women's rights and about the negative effects of FGM and the importance of educating both your male and your female, etc. But there are some cases that you will not even know about, because now the woman is even more afraid of telling anyone, because she will think that will worsen the situation for me and my girls. So that's one of the hugest challenges.
Yeah. It makes sense based on what I know about gender-based violence. It's interesting that it's not something so much that people are coming to the refugee camps to escape. It's once they get there that they kind of find out that this is happening to me and that it doesn't have to be this way. What you're saying is, as a family, they've sought asylum and through seeking that, through getting resources, they're learning there's an entire other layer to this that I had no idea I was even involved in.
Yeah. And then you realize they were victims in Somalia as well, but they thought that's normal.
Right.
Because everybody does it.
Yeah.
And then they come to the camp and a social worker tells them it's not right. He shouldn't be hitting you. Or you have rights. Like, oh my gosh, I have rights?
Yeah.
They are shocked that women have rights. It's just unbelievable that in this day and age that this still happens.
Yeah.
It's just like shocking and mind-boggling.
Oh, absolutely. And there are so many nuances, but to think of sexual violence, rape, and physical violence, the fact that FGM is still
prevalent.
Yeah. I mean, you don't know what you don't know, but it's mind-blowing that that is still a thing in this day and age.
Yeah. And if I may add something that might be even shocking, is that some of the perpetrators of sexual violence are the humanitarian aid workers themselves.
You know, again, based on what I know about gender-based violence, that does make sense, but that doesn't make it any easier to hear or accept. Wow.
Yeah. At some point, I was the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse, and was handling cases where some of my colleagues were the perpetrators. So you can imagine. So people wanting sexual favors in return for more food, for example, or with the promise of a scholarship, or the promise of money, or...
How do you not become jaded after that kind of work? Like, how do you stay...
Sane.
Yeah, honestly.
Yeah, there was a camp counselor, and it was sort of compulsory to see the counselor after 2 weeks, at least the minimum, because you see so much suffering, you hear so much pain, even unintentionally. You are not looking for painful experiences, but they're all around you.
Yeah.
Even on a regular basis, just your regular day. Sometimes just being at the refugee camps and seeing the number of people queuing for food, or the number of new arrivals. Like at the Dadaab refugee camp, there was an influx every month. You hear, there is a resurgence of war in Somalia, so we are expecting more refugees. And then the following day, it's like large numbers, thousands of people, sometimes even more than 1,000 a day arriving at the refugee camp.
Wow.
Yeah. So that alone is just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So mental health is very, very important for humanitarian aid workers. And I got to learn that. I used to think, forgive me, but I used to think therapy is for wussies. So me, Sia Kansla, why? Like Africans, we are tough and whatnot. Then I realized after my first 2 weeks, I nearly broke. Like I nearly went insane.
I can imagine.
Having seen all that suffering and feeling like I'm overwhelmed. How do I help all these people?
Yeah.
And I remember my former boss called me to his office and said, Winnie, you are not Jesus. You cannot solve everybody's problem. You pick one thing and you be excellent in it and meet that need. And hopefully someone else is meeting the other needs.
Yeah.
You know?
That's good advice.
Yeah, that way I was able to like
let go of some of it. Yeah,
let
for
go.
Sure.
You cannot change everybody's life and you cannot solve everyone else's problems.
Yeah.
So the counseling really helped, but also regular R&Rs. So we would always have flights booked. You would not stay for more than 8 weeks before taking a 2-week break, which was really, really helpful. You know, the first time I went for my first R&R, I thought, thank God I'm out of this camp. I'm like, I can't wait to get out. And then when I was home, by the second day, I was dying to go back. And that's how I knew I am in the right place.
Yeah.
I'm doing the right thing. I missed people so much. I missed refugees so much. I wanted to go back. So I can say mental health is very important because you cannot be a hero.
Yeah.
And if you want to be of help, also get help so that you're healthy enough to be helping others.
Absolutely. So you spent 1.5 years between the two camps, you said, and then you moved to the United States in Maine to Bates College, and you were a liaison. So you were still doing work
with the resettled refugees.
So what was that transition like, going from being in the heart of everything to working in a different part of that experience with refugees? And what was your job function? Okay.
That transition was another hard one. First thing I observed, the refugees were not in their natural, I don't know whether I can use the word habitat, because that's usually for animals. When I say this, it will make sense. You see, the UN and the Kenyan government looked for a place to host the refugees that was similar to Somalia, like was close in terms of the climate, the weather, everything.
Okay.
So at the refugee camp, it was pretty much like Somalia. But can you imagine a refugee comes from a hot desert in Kenya and moves to the heart of Maine?
No, I cannot.
Yeah. I cried the first time I saw refugees in the winter with their sandals and now really struggling to wear boots because that's not who they are. They're used to open flip-flops and they're wearing their hijabs and you're hoping that they are warm enough. I just felt for them that there was no acclimatization. It's like from desert to the coldest place on earth.
One of them, yeah.
So, and I think for me also is the realization that they were not happy. I expected, you've been resettled to the United States, you're in the land of the free. I had a talk once with some Somalis, and funnily, they knew me. Apparently, I had taught some of them in Kakuma, and they had been interested. And I was walking on the streets, and they saw it and said, "Weren't you a teacher at Kakuma?" I was like, I didn't remember them.
Yeah.
But I had very good conversations with them, and I asked them, "So how's life in the U.S.?" And they were like, "I would rather be at the refugee camp."
Oh,
Can you imagine that?
No.
They said life here is difficult. The weather, the people, to them, we look like terrorists. We cannot do businesses like we did in Somalia. In Kenya, some of them get to start small businesses. But in the U.S., it was really difficult. Just the sense of community that they had at the refugee camp is no longer there. And now they live in fear for their lives. and race issues. They were being exposed to more difficult situations that they had at the refugee camp. So, and you see now, once you're resettled, you no longer receive aid. So you fend for yourself, you buy your own car, you feed your family. So that transition is really difficult. So for me as well, it was really difficult. And then here I was at Bates College. My title was Learning Associate. So I was teaching some courses, and I was also working in the community with the resettled refugees and assessing their language needs. What language do they need to go to the hospital? Are those needs being met? What about refugee students in elementary and middle and high school? What are their needs? Are those needs being met? Is the curriculum in the schools meeting the needs of refugee or immigrant children, etc.? So here I am. I'm at Bates College. I just came from working from the refugee camp and interacting with Bates students who come from rich families and have everything. The mess has the best food. Did you know that Bates College at some point had the best food in any school cafeteria in the United States?
I did not know that.
Yeah. So that disconnect, I would say, with Bates students and what refugees were going through, I could not understand that. I could not handle the disconnect of seeing the abundance and the lack. So that was tough for me. I didn't really like that job.
Yeah.
Not because Bates College was not good to me. They were. It's just seeing that divide and not being able to handle the extremes of extreme abundance and extreme suffering.
Right.
I would say, yeah, that was a tough for me.
There's no real or easy way to bridge that gap because they are on complete opposite sides of the spectrum.
Yeah.
So you spent an academic year there, spent a little more time, but then you went down to Camden. So you were no longer working with refugees after that. So how did you make that move out of there? And were you, again, the transition from what you were doing in Camden was not to prioritize anybody's pain, but it's definitely different.
Yeah.
Being in an urban environment than being a completely stateless refugee.
Yeah. I think at that point I was feeling like I wanted to do something different. I felt like I wasn't making any difference with the refugees. I think I had gotten to a place of frustration with myself and my inability to meet real needs. And I was looking for another need. Which didn't work out too well because I didn't enjoy working in the inner city either.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I was still trying to find that balance that I had at the refugee camp where I felt there was this huge need and it was making some difference. It may be a drop in the ocean, but it was some difference. And I couldn't find that high, if I may use the word. I couldn't. And I was trying to be here and here and here. And to be honest, I've never gone back to that place, to that high.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's a very unique situation. Do you think that there's a part of you that just can't after what you've experienced firsthand? So many other things pale in comparison.
Definitely. And I have made peace with the fact that I may not be able to go back there and work with refugees. I may not get that opportunity, but it has made me, it's not a good thing. Compare people's pain.
Sure.
Or people's suffering. It does not negate the fact that people are suffering, but I have not witnessed any other suffering which compares to what refugees go through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a very human thing. That's a very human part of it. And I don't think you can escape that. And I think there are a lot worse takeaways that you could have come away with. Yeah. But it's so important. You will always be an advocate for refugees because of what you saw. There is never a situation that's going to come up regarding refugees where you're going to be apathetic about it. You know, you always have skin in the game at this point, which is an asset for those people that need that, because there is always going to be a need for people that are willing to fight. Whatever that looks like, whatever season of life you're in, wherever you are, right? So I think it's completely human to sit where you are now and say, listen, I'm compassionate towards people's pain and I don't want anybody to suffer, but I have seen the worst of humanity and nothing compares to that.
Yeah, I think you just summed up so well, and like you understand me. Yeah, thank you for that.
Oh, gosh, thank you. So you didn't really enjoy the inner city work in Camden. And how long were you there?
I was there for 2 years, actually.
Okay.
I did enjoy, though, fundraising for African programs.
That's right. You did say that.
Part of my work was visiting churches and talking to them about programs that were being started in Africa and looking for money to boost those programs. So that was fun.
Good. So you were in the States for a little more than 3 years then? And then you came back to Kenya? What brought you back?
Good question. I miss my family. I miss the sense of community in Kenya, which I wasn't getting in the US. It's too individualistic of a culture to me.
It is a very individualistic culture.
And I am a people's person.
Yeah.
And I felt constricted. And I know I might return, but I will return knowing what I know now and psychologically prepared to deal with it. But yeah, I came because I miss my mom and my sisters and my brothers.
Yeah.
And just general Kenyan warmth. But I came hoping that I would work at the refugee camp. Which was not possible because, finding a job at the camps is very hard.
So why is that? Why is it hard to find a job there, especially having the experience that you do?
Opportunity. People don't leave.
Okay.
So there are not so many opportunities unless
somebody leaves.
Like new programs are created, which doesn't always happen, or somebody leaves. Or they'll go to another organization within the refugee community, and the refugee is like internal staffing.
Oh, okay.
So not so many outsiders.
Yeah.
So that was a challenge. And at the same time, I don't think I would have gotten my old job back because now I was more qualified. But I've been in Kenya for a while now since.
Yeah. So what year did you come back?
I came back in 2011 and worked with various relief and development agencies.
Were you just kind of like working for different places and hadn't really found a place that you wanted to settle and a place that you loved at that point? And then you eventually stumbled across Nema, or Nema stumbled across you? I'm not actually sure.
Nema stumbled across me. I didn't know about Nema until my professor recommended me. That's how I got to know about Nema. And I have been here since 2019. And I think this is the closest I have come to feeling that high.
Wow. That's a really big statement.
Yeah.
So you came the beginning of 2019, yes?
Yeah, in January. Yeah.
So you worked for a year, and then you had to be the program director for a project that had to basically shut down in a lot of ways because a pandemic was happening.
Yeah.
So what was it like to run a program through a pandemic?
Funny enough, I think it was one of my favorite times at Nema.
You are so funny. I mean, I love you. I love it because you're like, I will choose the opposite of whatever is easy. And you keep proving that over and over again. Yeah. But you're perfect for it. It's great.
Oh, thank you. I liked it because I like a challenge. And COVID presented a huge challenge for us. Like
Indeed.
How do we continue to be there for our girls in the midst of a pandemic? And so I called my team and we brainstormed it. Very fun. How do we continue with counseling? And that's how we came up with Zoom counseling. And we were able to provide food donations to Nema families. So apart from our usual regular Nema programming, we were able to do more than we ever thought we could.
Yeah.
And for 6 continuous months, every month, we fed all of Nema families.
Wow.
providing rice and maize and beans and lettuce and sugar and all their family needs, really.
Yeah. While the program was shut down.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so we channeled our regular money for classroom into immediate needs of the families. And I was really, really glad that we were able to do that.
Yeah.
Families were starving in Kenya. That was such a fulfilling time for us, being able to meet those immediate needs. And also as a manager, I had time. My job is really busy with sometimes day to day, and I really have time to think about visionary things,
Sure,
future things. And here I was working from home and now having all this time to think about Neyma's next step. I was beginning to think, what's our vision 2025? Where can we get more funding? Yeah. So that was really good for me to grow into that. And me on the ground, me and my staff and the US team not being able to come and visit and trusting us that we are running programs efficiently, that was a good time for us as well. And it gives us a chance to prove our leadership and our creativity and our passion. So that's why actually 2020 was a good year for me. Unfortunately, I know so many people it's not, but for us it was. We were able to be even closer to our families.
Yeah. What a ministry itself to just say, listen, our programs aren't running, but we're not going anywhere. We are here for you. And we're going to, like you said, support your immediate needs. We're not going to sit here and cry about how we can't take tests or send pictures of these huge accomplishments because ultimately the goal is the overall well-being of these young women and their families and their communities. So to see that lived out in a way where a lot of people not only struggled, but struggled to do well in that time. And just that you saw that as an opportunity instead of a hardship or a hurdle, I think proves that you do have a great program and staff here in Kenya, and you're doing amazing, amazing things for these communities.
Yeah, I'm really grateful for my staff. When I go on leave is when I realize, I do have wonderful staff. All the nice results we are getting, that's my staff putting in the work.
You do. You have an incredible staff, but they also have an incredible leader, because it takes somebody that knows how to lead well. There's a trust, there's a respect mutually that comes from the top down.
I hope so.
It does. You're a writer, and you're somewhat recently published. Yes. Tell me about that, because I have not had a chance to read your short story yet, but it's something I'm very much looking forward to.
Thank you. So since, I know this sounds cliche, but since I was young, I knew I wanted to be a writer. That's why I went for a major in English and literature. But I never got the opportunity. And when I did get an opportunity, I realized that actually I am good at it and I enjoy it. But then I realized as well that I am good at it because I write about my experiences. So my writing is informed by my work. Like out of my refugee camps experience, US and here and China and wherever, I don't have material to write. I don't write fantasy. I am not that of a creative. I prefer using experiences that have happened and creating fiction out of it. I am not stealing that experience per se, but I'm creating something that doesn't exist out of something that existed or exists.
Yeah.
So it's not out of a void. Pretty much I'm trying to make voices of people who may not ever get an opportunity to have their voices out there. I'm using my stories to have their stories out there.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So the short story that was published is actually a refugee woman. That one is not actually based on anyone's experience that I know, but it was actually born out of the harassment of urban refugees by Kenya police. just seeing it and reading it in the papers or seeing it in the news. That frustration I felt, that's how that story was born.
And it's something that's obviously very close to you, but it's such a good outlet, right? To channel. It's very real and visceral emotions that are coming from that. While it's not a specific story of somebody that you know, I'm sure it pulls from so many of your experiences over the years.
Yeah.
And this buildup of here we are 10, 15, 20 years later, whatever, and things are still the same. Things have not changed.
Yeah.
And we're still seeing the same things over and over again. So the collection of short stories is called
Nairobi Noir.
Nairobi Noir.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize this, but there's multiple cities under that name, correct?
Yes, there's Brooklyn, Noir, there's Amsterdam, there's Johannesburg, there's Accra, there's Lagos. In Nigeria, and I think there's Egypt. So I think it's multiple cities from all over the world.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's the same publisher?
Same.
That does an anthology of short stories from writers in the country.
Yes, they're called Akashic New York.
So how did you get involved in this?
I belonged to a book club that we concentrate on African writers. So we only do books by African authors. Mostly women, to try and encourage readership of African people.
Yeah.
And so we invited the author of Dance of the Jacaranda, who is Kenyan. His name is Peter Kimani. So we invited Peter Kimani into our forum because we were doing his book. And we decided, let's use this event to also help him market his book, which was new-ish. And most people didn't know it. And so we called the newspapers and media, etc. And so during the question and answer session, someone asked him, what's your current project? And he said he was working on the Nairobi Noir. And some people in my book club were like, and Winnie writes. We have writers in our book club. And would you be interested in including their stories? And he said, I would need to see if it's good enough. And I would also need to talk to my publishers because I had already sent the first draft of the anthology. So that was on a Saturday. So he gave me Monday and Tuesday, and he said to send him the first draft by Tuesday. So I literally had no time. And so the Noah series is based on different parts of each city. So the Nairobi Noah has different parts of Nairobi city and themes emanating from each context. And I knew that I couldn't choose what the other authors had already chosen. So I was limited. I was constricted in terms of choosing which themes to write about or which places. So I ended up writing about what knowledgeable about, that's refugee issues.
Yeah.
So that's how I chose Eastleigh. Eastleigh is in the eastern part of the city where a majority of the Somali refugees live. So that's where my story is set.
And so Peter Kimani was his name? He was in charge of getting all of the stories together for the Nairobi Noir.
And editing them.
So he chose all of the authors from Kenya.
Yeah, he did.
And so it was only supposed to be 12, but you were the 13th. They added you in after.
Like a last minute.
Because it was so good. And I can't believe I haven't read this yet.
I hope so.
I mean, I'm sure it was. And when was that published?
In 2019, and it was launched in January 2020.
Okay.
Actually, February. Sorry, just before COVID.
Oh, yeah. Okay. And that's how you ended up meeting your now husband, correct?
Yeah. As a literary critic, he attended the launch. And we didn't talk because I didn't know him. He didn't know me, but he was interested in writing. He's also published, but he writes academic papers. So he wanted to write what he calls notes based on my story. So that's how he contacted me. And we discussed my story, and he had questions, and he wrote his notes. And after that, we continued talking, and we liked each other.
That's great.
And so it's sort of like we dated via WhatsApp because I didn't meet him for 4 months.
Because of the pandemic?
Yes.
Yeah.
Until on my birthday, he came to see me in Kitale. And that's the first time I saw him after talking to him on the phone for a while. So
all meant to be. It's so interesting just hearing your story in this chronological order, because it's so clear how all of your other experiences have informed the experiences you continue to have. Mm-hmm. And it's just a beautiful expression of your passion, right? You are clearly so passionate about what you do and about the people around you. Mm-hmm. And that has come out in myriad ways as you walk through life and do different things and have different experiences. You have this heartline right back to working in those refugee camps. I hope for you that you do get that experience again, just because I know that that's what your heart desires. And I hope that in some capacity, you're able to fulfill that heart's desire again.
Thank you. I hope so too.
I mean, I guess we kind of already discussed your dreams, but what are your dreams? What are your hopes for not even just yourself, the refugees, for NEMA, for your country, anything? What are your dreams?
I hope to get the novel I'm working on published, and that way more refugee stories will be out there.
Yeah.
I know this is such a huge desire that may not be fulfilled, but I think I dream of a world where there are no refugees. And humanity keeps shocking me that we still have the capacity, even after witnessing such suffering, that we have the capacity to hurt each other, that there's a war going on right now. That is like shocking in 2022, like really, because after what we've witnessed in Syria, in Somalia, in all these other places, that we've learned what not to do. But that's one of the areas where I have no faith in humanity, that we will keep hurting each other. I wish I would live in a world where there were no wars, where we do not create refugees or internally displaced persons.
Yeah.
People who have a right to their home, to an identity, not stateless. I know it sounds huge and everything, but yeah, that's my hope.
It is huge, but you know what? We're going to speak life into that, because it's not too huge. Nothing's too huge. So,
and I think my greatest desire for me and for others is to be that drop in the ocean. The ocean is made up of those very little drops, but if there's not a single drop, then there's no ocean.
wow.
Sometimes we think, oh, the world is full of problems. What can I do? And guess what? That little thing you can do, it can help. And it doesn't have to start with you going to a Syrian refugee camp or to Ukraine. It's just starts by being nice and kind to your neighbor. I think that's where humanity starts.
Yeah.
For me, my neighbor is Irene, it's Joyce, it's my staff.
Yeah.
Because how I treat people determines whether they will treat others right. So I'm not part of a negative cycle. If I am kind to someone, they are most likely going to be kind to another person. And that's how you start a ripple effect. If you have refugees around your neighborhood, be nice. Sometimes they just need a kind, smiling neighbor. I met people in Maine that were taking families to the hospital to translate. They have learned Somali and they need translators in the hospital to know what's wrong with this mama. And someone goes to the hospital and translates. Or someone offers to teach driving to their kids, because themselves, they don't know how to drive. They've never driven a vehicle, but they have teenagers now who could potentially get a car and get a job. Someone offering to teach them how to drive. This could be something small in your eyes, but it is super huge to someone else. So that's my desire. Be kind to one another, your colleagues, your neighbors.
Yeah. I think this is something you've already partially answered, especially with that last question, but it is something I ask everybody. So through the lens of your experience, how do you live with compassion?
It starts from where I am. I cannot go to the refugee camps and say that's where I practice my humanity if I am not practicing it here. Then it's hypocrisy. I cannot be a missionary out there and yet I'm not starting in Jerusalem. Cannot be going to Samaria and my Jerusalem is suffering. So I start those around me before going out there, so that out there is an extension of just who I am.
I love that. Compassion is an extension of who you already are.
Yeah, you can't make it up.
No, you really can't.
Yeah,
you really can't.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that we all have a slightly different view of what is compassionate based on how we've received compassion through our own experiences and how we've given or seen others receive compassion.
May I add something?
Absolutely.
Sometimes people who have been in a cycle of suffering think they have nothing to offer, or people who've received just negativity and violence, and then they feel like, I am a violent person because I received violence. No, I have learned that everyone has the capacity to be compassionate. And I know some people would try and prove me wrong. There's some people who are just born evil and everything. But I believe good is in each of us. And sometimes we just lack the opportunity or even the knowledge, the know-how of how do I bring out that good and use it to help others. So,
wow, I love that. Thank you so much. I've taken so much of your time.
It's all right.
But your story is incredible. You're incredible. I just really appreciate you taking the time to sit down and share your story. This whole thing is about opening up people's eyes to different worldviews, different perspectives, but it's also about hearing a voice that resonates with you. And so that's my hope, especially for your interview, that somebody hears it that is like, that's my story, that's who I am, that's who I was, and that it resonates with them. So thank you.
Thank you too for that opportunity.
Thank you for listening to The Human Experience. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. This is honestly the best way that you can support, as subscribing helps us rank higher in the charts and makes us more visible. If you haven't left a rating on Apple or Spotify, that's another way to support. We can be skeptical of what's online, so other people's recommendations carry a lot of weight. On that same note, leaving a review on Apple Podcasts is also really helpful. Of course, sharing with your friends, family, and acquaintances via word of mouth, social media, or even carrier pigeon is always a fantastic way to support as well. Everyone has a story, and I'd love to hear yours. So be sure to check out the show notes for more information about how to stay in touch. Do good and take care.